Welcome to the podcast, Giving Back is Dead. Today we're talking with Roya Sachs. Hello, Roya.
Hello, Scott. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you doing? Roya is an independent curator and artistic director based in London. She presents exhibitions, performances, installations, and collaborations with institutions and companies. And she is known for many things. Among them, she's co-founder of the creative house Triadic. And Triadic has an important role in creating the Format Festival, which begins this coming weekend, and was a little bit the impetus of us getting together today and talk. But in addition, you were also involved with the Performa Biennial, and the Performa Biennial, which has a very prestigious and important history to all of us, begins in November. So those two events are a little bit the impetus for us getting together to talk about it. So as you know, Giving Back is Dead is a podcast which looks at the changing attitudes for giving among the next generation. And I've been impressed and moved by the work you've been doing, Roya. So it was important to me to have this conversation with you. Among the among the questions that I have, and we've discussed this previously, is you move seamlessly between profit and nonprofit work, and I wonder, is that distinction at all relevant anymore?
I think that the kind of balance between the two has been a lot more blurred than I would say historically, where people would really exclusively work in the nonprofit space, and that would mean that they have to stay within a certain sector and activate certain branches of the cultural world. But nowadays, I think that the next generation are looking for a lot more than that. I think that there is a kind of shift in terms of, the old vanguard, politely being slightly more focused just on donations and philanthropic giving in a very kind of classical manner. But I'm finding it more and more that, philanthropy of my generation is to do more with activism. It's actually being actively involved in different cultural spaces. And I think that to make a long answer to a short question, I think that those then oscillate between the realms of profit and non-profit, because I think you can support artists in both of those realms. I think you can change and shift perceptions of the art world in both of those spaces. And everything is a lot more fluid these days. Everyone's able to promote themselves. Everyone's able to communicate with themselves in a much more kind of free-flowing manner.
Because I was talking recently, I mentioned I was talking to a friend of mine, actually, it was Georgina Adam, who's coming out with a new edition of her book on private museums. And she's using the ICOM definition of a museum is a nonprofit, has to be a nonprofit. And I told her that I thought that is not really that relevant anymore, and particularly not to next generation. And I was intrigued when I was looking at your mission statement for Triadic. So Triadic, I assume, is a for-profit company.
Yes, it is.
Okay. So if you don't mind, I'm going to read the mission statement. It says, our mission is to make our clients relevant contributors in the creative community, expanding audiences' connection through impactful, immersive, and collective experiences. So I think that if we take out immersive and collective and we just say relevant contributors to creative community, expanding audiences' connection through impactful experiences, that's what all, nonprofit initiatives in art want to do.
Exactly.
We agree. And I don't see what does it matter if it's nonprofit or for profit.
Yeah, and you asked the question, is it a for-profit company? It is. I founded it with my two business partners, Mafalda Milias and Elizabeth Edelman. All three of us come from different backgrounds. Some that were in curating design, others from directing, others from nonprofit festival production. So all of these realms and all of our different experiences kind of came together exactly to this point, that art has fewer and fewer boundaries. So how can we actually democratize the art world? And I think, interestingly, philanthropy of today is also a lot about democratizing the art world. It's about making it more accessible. It's about community. It's about bringing people together. And I think that, when we launched our company, which was in 2019, not not soon before COVID, which was really not the time to launch a experience-based company. So we quickly had to kind of, think outside the box in terms of what can we do, from our homes that still sits in the ethos of what Triadic does. And that's how we actually started developing a project called Still Here, Moments in Isolation, which originally just began as a way of us to connect with the creatives that we support and admire, and just checking in on how they were doing, where they were, and asking them to send us a picture and a small statement and a date and time of where they were, and a still life of their, environment in this, very kind of strange and confined moment in history. And strangely, it just became this much kind of larger geographical archive of this moment in time that ended up spreading across 4 continents, 150 different creatives, all sharing their kind of story of confinement. And we got so much traction that we then actually pitched it to Distance Publishing, which is a art publishing house based in Berlin, and turned it into a book. And again, that was a non-profit project. It had nothing to do with, what is our aim to get out of this. It was really just a way for us to share and tell a story, to make people feel like they were connected and a part of something much bigger. And, now it's a beautiful thing to be able to kind of hold in your hands. It's tactile. You're able to share it. And then all of the profits for that book went towards supporting Performa, which is very close to my heart.
Okay, there's all these things I want to talk about more. So you do think books are important?
I do think books.
Because my image of you is someone who's working more on these immersive collective experiences. And I think, to me, that's what I see. I think you're known for, and working at this intersection of art, performance, music, film, technology. So I'm intrigued why you've gone back to a book.
Well, I mean, I think I will say it might be the only book I do in my life, because it was so intense. I really have so much respect for people that work in publishing. Well, I'm happy that you asked that question, because actually the book ended up being quite interactive. It did have a kind of performative twist to it. We had an entire element of augmented reality also within the book, where we worked with opera singers who actually wanted to submit a song. We worked with video artists like William Kentridge, who wanted to send a video work. And so we actually developed a technology with Distance in which you were able to hover your phone over certain images and pages, and you would actually get that content, whether that was audio or visual. And then we also worked with Sissel Tollas, who's a Norwegian pioneering smell artist, who actually developed a bookmark for us that was a unique smell for her representation of what does new beginning smell like in this strange moment in time. And so every bookmark and every book has a unique smell that stays on it forever.
Fantastic. How do we get this book?
I will send you a copy.
Why don't I have one?
Why don't you have one? Exactly. That is the question.
I don't understand. How can I not have this book? Well, if we go, so you say that Performa is very close to your heart. I was thinking, of course, I don't know if it's my question, is I realized that Rosalie Goldberg, its director and founder, was a professor at NYU, and you went to NYU. Was she one of your professors at NYU?
Unfortunately not, because Rosalie teaches a master's class there, and I was there for undergrad. But soon after I graduated from university, and I rapidly realized that I didn't want to work in the conventional curatorial space. I did an internship at MoMA, internship at Sotheby's, and I essentially decided it would be a good idea, age 22, to just break out and go rogue and start coming up with my own projects. And a lot of those very organically started being quite performative, where I would meet an opera singer in the subway, then I'd invite them to come and sing at my opening impromptu, and then I met a digital artist and I was like, can you film people coming in? And I started realizing that I was more obsessed with the opening event and how I could provoke audiences' reactions than the actual exhibition itself. So that's kind of how my love of performance art really emerged. And then after a while of doing that, someone insisted that I should meet Rosalie, and that Performa was really at the cutting edge of performing arts in New York, but also globally. And so I started getting more and more involved with Performa, and I'm very fortunate to say Rosalie really became a mentor in many ways to me throughout my time in New York. And through that, I kind of started getting more and more involved, and then I joined the board I think 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah, because for me, Rose, I don't know enough about performance, but Rose Lee is the person that has made it essential part of the art infrastructure. So it seemed to me it's interesting to me that you are intimately involved and on the board. Why are you on the? What is the relevance to be on the board of director of such a nonprofit? What is your role? Do you feel you have an impact in what you're doing as a board member? And why did you? I presume you had a choice. Why are you on the board of directors and not on the curatorial advisory board?
I think that through my involvement that developed when I started doing partnerships with Performa and different branches that they were doing, I already kind of had a very strong curatorial vision of what I was working on. And to me, it was super interesting to be able to also step into a role that was slightly more challenging. I was the youngest person to join the board at the time, with a lot of people that I respected in the industry. And I think the one thing, not that I brought much to the table, I think, but the one thing I did bring was a new perspective and a new generation of performing arts, curators, of which there are not that many. It's quite a niche, I have to say, but still, luckily, I'm glad to say. And that kind of allowed me to give a different kind of perspective. And I started getting very involved in curating the galas with the entire team, kind of outside the box ways of bringing in different audiences, merging music, merging art, merging technology, and also very much focused on kind of audience engagement and interaction.
Well, that sounds fantastic. So let's talk a little bit more. Let's go back about the Format Festival, which is beginning now. So this is the second time you're doing the Format Festival. Can you talk a little bit about it and how do you contrast that to the Performa biennial, for instance? There's similar, it seems like there's similar elements. And then I'm intrigued about that Format Festival, I assume as well, is a for-profit. Is it?
Yes, it is.
So tell me about, distinguish a little bit the two. It seems to me from the outside, if I tell you from the outside, it seems to me that Format is much more immersive and interactive and collective. It goes back to your terms, immersive, interactive, collective, than the Performa, which is more like looking at a performance piece from a distance. Is that correct?
Yes and no. So Performa, of course, is a biennial, right? The similarities that we have between the two is definitely that both parties are commissioning visual contemporary artists to create new work, to engage with a different type of audience. What's super interesting and what I find super inspiring about Performa is that it oftentimes is trying to take artists that are not at all in the performing arts and invite them to experiment, to step out of the box and try something completely new. And in that sense, Performa has really separated itself from many other biennials by really presenting work that is radically different, that is radically provocative, and that you wouldn't expect to see. And Format, on the other hand, similarly, of course, does focus on this idea of how can you bring art in a different space that's not in the white walls of a gallery, that is tactile, that is, with purpose and intent and engaging in a different way. But we, again, are confronted with the fact that we're trying to bring contemporary visual artists into a music festival landscape. So Format really emerged as an entity between Live Nation, who are the biggest festival and live music producers in the world, the Walton family, that's based out of Bentonville, Arkansas. That's why we're doing it there, and Triadic. So the three of us. And out of that, we really wanted to kind of tap into a new market that we really saw lacking in terms of the festival landscape, which was slightly more curated, tailored at a slightly older audience, rather than the kind of 19, 20-year-old Coachella festival that's very music centric and art plays a very decorative and circumference role. Here we really wanted art and music to be presented on the same playing field, and then within that create those bridges of collaboration. But in many ways, Format is for profit, but there are many aspects of that in which we try to also have these more philanthropic endeavors, in which we work very closely with the University of Arkansas. And last year we had the entire drumline from the university come to Format and perform with Nick Cave's Sound Suits performers, and then worked with an up-and-coming Chicago-based composer called Jay Lin, and we did that with Pomegranate Art. So that was kind of a lot of different entities coming together, and it's important for us through the platform that we have at Format to be able to bring different types of young and old, established and not established performers together, and hopefully out of that kind of spark curiosity, and in many ways also then educate an audience of a new type of space and in a new type of context that isn't as intimidating as a gallery or a museum space.
It all seems very exciting. I was at a dinner party last year, just before your first edition, and everybody was in Paris, and everybody was going to Format. So I felt terribly left out.
Well, lucky for you, we're 1 week out, so you can still book your flights.
I think what I'm trying to get at between, if you don't permit me for a second, that just one more moment about this for-profit and nonprofit. What it seems to me, but you're also commissioning new work from artists from all different areas and fields together. And what I would, a lot of nonprofits in the arts have an enormous difficulty in being sustainable and being able to find the funds necessary to do what they want to do. So what I'm trying to get at is I would like to believe that this distinction is really irrelevant, because what is relevant is what you actually commission and do. And if, because we're calling it a for-profit initiative, it permits you to do more, to commission more art, to bring more to move more people, I think that's important. And that's probably better than being within the constraint of something that is strictly nonprofit.
Totally. And, as an example, this year we're working with JR's Inside Out project, which is his photo booth van that's really traveled across, the entire country. They've, worked with over 400 institutions. And that is a non-profit entity in and of itself. But of course, we're plugging it into this different model. So yes, as you said, the distinction is completely irrelevant, but within that, then there's a different type of messaging and communication. And we're also working with the university to cover their campus with portraits in the lead up to the festival. So there are all these types of branches and connections. And as I, mentioned earlier, I think that the philanthropy of today is also very much rooted in this idea of activism, of being activated, of being a part of the action rather than just adding your name to something, which I think is super exciting. And I think it's pushing both artists and people working in the creative industry to a little bit think outside the box from the normal foundations that the art world was built on.
So do you mentioned also a couple of times about that you are able to attract a younger audience. which is what it seems to me as well, that you attract a younger audience. Do you have any figures about attendance figures and any kind of profile of the attendees to these events?
Yeah, so I mean, with format, we're going for slightly older than the kind of university demographic, but 80% of our demographic last year was between the age of 25 and 55, which is exactly that kind of sweet spot that we were going for, because it's kind of the people that no longer want to go to a 100,000 person squeezed in space that's like very hectic, but people that are still going to concert, that are still curious, that want to learn, that want to, throw themselves into a weekend of activities. So that model has developed a lot more in Europe, I find, in terms of festivals that are usually actually attended by slightly older demographic. But in the States, it's still quite taboo, the concept of going to a festival when you're slightly older, which shouldn't really be the case because, it's just like trying to reformulate a concept like South by Southwest, but on a campus and in a much shorter amount of time.
Do you know why? Do you have any ideas why that's less the case in the United States, where the older people don't want to go to these weekend events?
I think it's just how festivals developed, over time in the States, and in Europe. I guess there are more pockets of specific generations and population demographics and nationalities that all have their own identity in the kind of festival landscape. But it was also very much the Europeans in Belgium and Denmark that were the pioneers of creating these like very elaborate festivals that engaged a very large amount of the population. And Glastonbury really kind of stands the test of time for that, which is technically, has been developed as a nonprofit, and it donates a certain amount of its funds every year to the causes that they believe in. Whereas in the States, I think the model was developed slightly differently. And the acts, I guess, that they booked there were also tailored at younger audiences.
What do you think? What do you think is the future of our of our historical institutions and museums? Will they be able to continue to attract next generation younger people and also the funding from next generation people?
The importance and relevance of museums and institutions will always, I think, stand the test of time. I still, go to museums to see the highest quality art presentations and performances. And I think it's super integral to have that for that foundational educational narrative and storytelling, whether it's, a retrospective on Bauhaus architecture and art during the 1920s in Germany, or, whether you're looking at Jacob Lawrence and going into the Harlem Renaissance in America. Oftentimes younger spaces, galleries, more experimental spaces aren't going to be tapping into those very important historical thematics. They could pull inspiration from it, but I think that one bridge leads to the other. And I think that more experience-based art is interesting because it's first detaching audiences from the digital space and from actually being online constantly and actually being a part of something. And I think that more and more people are going to need that human connection and community attachment to real life, right? Because we're spending so much time in this virtual space. So I think that it's not really one or the other. There's space and there's room for everyone to coexist, and every different realm has an important pillar in the art world. Whether one or the other is expanding at a quicker rate, I think is irrelevant, because at the end of the day, we need all of them in order to survive.
Absolutely. Very encouraging for those of us who believe in the legacy institution. So talk to me a little bit more about your general curatorial work. I think that's the core of what you've been doing, is really the curatorial work. If you could just give us a little bit about an overview of what you do and how you approach being a curator.
Yes. So my approach, as you said earlier, is very much focused on unconventional and unconventional spaces and installations, with very much a focus on performance art and large scale commissions. So that really developed. I lived in New York for 10 years with my work with Performa, my independent curatorial work. And then I became curator of the Lever House Art Collection, which is a private collection in the Upper East Side that commissions single artist installations. And it's a very iconic landmark building from the 1950s. And so that was a super interesting challenge for me, because you're dealing with a lobby space that has a glass wall around it, terrazza floors, metal pillars. You've got the noise and the texture of New York City that's really bleeding into this gallery space. So trying to work with artists that were able to take on that challenge and have a voice, where you are confronted with an installation or an artwork, whether you like it or not, whether you're walking down Park Avenue and you're late for a meeting, or you're walking through the lobby. And I adored this challenge of thinking about a 360-degree experience in a space that already has such a strong identity. So I did 5 commissions at Lever House over 4 years, I think it was, including Peter Halley and Catherine Bernhardt. And for each of them, it was really interesting to find a way to build that bridge between being complemented by the noise of New York City and the hustle and bustle of the street, but also having something that draws and pulls the viewer into the space to engage with art. And I think that the best and most exciting art is when you're confronted by it, or you're inviting audiences that don't necessarily have the foundations of art knowledge as one does going into a gallery or museum, but hopefully through that kind of provoking a reaction. And I love in my work to create reactions, whether that's positive or negative. That's okay. Everyone has, the right to their own opinion, but the only thing I don't want in my work is that people feel nothing at all. Then I've failed in my work.
And as I was looking a little bit about the history of your work, I came upon this virtually there that you did at Mana Contemporary in Jersey City in 2016. And I was wondering if that, and I was also intrigued because then I read that it was inspired by Oscar Schlemmer's triadic ballet from 1922, which I assume was the inspiration then for forming your company.
Yes, it was. So virtually there.
So tell
Yeah,
me.
I'm so glad you brought that up. That's really my favorite project of all time.
It's so beautiful. I only saw it, on video, but it's incredibly beautiful.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We're longing to bring it back somewhere. Virtually, there was actually a project that Mafalda, my business partner and kind of co-creative director of Triadic, that we developed. We're old family friends, and we actually found out that we had this mutual passion for the Bauhaus, and specifically for Oscar Schlemmer and his performances. And I actually remember the day when Mafalda showed me the 1960 recreation of the Oscar Schlemmer triadic ballet that was done by Margaret Hastings, and literally we were obsessed. And so from that moment on, we wanted to find a way to recreate it, but again, bringing together all of these different worlds. So we invited the Campana brothers to do the costumes, Carol Armitage, the iconic punk ballerina from New York, to do the choreography. We worked with 2 Whitney Banyal artists to do the staging, and then an underground French composer to do the sound. So really a very eclectic bunch of people that otherwise would not be in the same room together. And to say that it was a passion project is to say the least, because it was really it was a struggle to pull together. But then we somehow were connected to Mana Contemporary, and we pitched the idea, they went for it. And so we started developing this, completely wild project, which came out to be really quite spectacular and inspiring. And from that moment on, Mafalda and I really found ourselves on this kind of very equal, creative playing field, which is very rare as a creative and as a curator. Finding someone who really understands the dimensions that you work in is difficult. So we soon after that realized that we actually work very well together. And then as we started forming the company and we brought Lizzie on, our third partner, we knew it was going to be a good fit. So
I'm virtually, I just watched it the other day in anticipation of talking to you, and I think it's still terribly moving and relevant. And I think it would be great that it would be shown more.
Totally. Also, the original triadic ballet was just so radical and avant-garde. So it's definitely something that I think will have a comeback.
And beyond do you want to tell us something about Format Festival? What should we expect? Anything that you want people to know about?
So it's happening in a week, which is completely wild. But we're super excited. We have actually moved the festival site to the Momentary, which is one of our partner museums based in Bentonville, Arkansas. And it's actually a repurposed cheese factory that they've turned into a cultural space. And so we're really taking over the entire campus. And we've got over 50 musical acts. So we have LCD Sound System, Alanis Morissette, and Leon Bridges headlining this year. And then we have 3 venues that we call, and each of these venues were designed and created by visual artists that have everything from marching bands from New Orleans to a Cuban percussionist to Indian synth musician. So it's really quite eclectic. And on the art side, we have about a dozen visual artists. I'm probably most excited about the Guerrilla Girls, who we've been working closely with over the past year, that are building a site-specific installation. They'll be doing workshops, and they're really going to be voicing their iconic activist narrative, breaking gender roles, breaking the infrastructure of museums, breaking down political rights, and it's all that more slightly provocative in a space like Arkansas that otherwise these days doesn't have as much going for it.
And what about the future? What's your future projects, Roya? What else can we expect? What other great things you must be working on?
I mean, Scott, when I figure it out, I'll let you know, but hopefully I'll sleep at some point. No, so we one of our main other big projects is a new cultural center that's just opened in Mumbai called the Nita Mukesh Ambani Cultural Center that just opened this April. And they, within that, have a new art house, which is a 4-floored exhibition space that we're curating 3 exhibitions in over the next 3 years. So we opened our first show in July this year. So we've been commuting between Arkansas and Mumbai. And I don't recommend it. So we're already.
Do you have time? You can't possibly have time for a personal life.
I don't have time for a personal life. It's overrated.
Well, okay. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm a bit embarrassed that I've taken you away from getting everything ready for Format Festival. So thank you for taking the time. And I look forward to following all the great things that you're doing.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate it. And any excuse to procrastinate. So this was absolutely delightful.
Be sure to check out our latest podcast and subscribe to Giving Back is Dead.